Okay, welcome back to the podcast. One thing that came from a previous video, I'm not even sure whether it was the podcast. I don't think it was actually. I think it was a previous video I made. I was wearing an orange shirt, and quite a few people in the comments said that I shouldn't wear an orange shirt because in America, in the US, you wear an orange shirt when you're in prison. Well, you might have noticed from my accent, but I'm not actually from the US. Just keep that to yourself. Yeah. So, and you know, what I was going to say is that how do you know I wasn't in a US prison when I recorded that last episode? But yeah, I'm not American. I didn't know that was a thing. Does that mean that nobody in the US wears an orange shirt ever, except unless they're, in prison? I don't know. But anyway, I thought I'd point that out, that I'm actually not from the US, so I'm allowed to wear orange shirt. All right, so we've got a few topics for this podcast. One of them is about security systems on yachts. You hear a lot of stories, especially in the press. Another one is about hidden ownership, how they hide the ownership of a yacht. And the last, or the third topic is about pets. Keeping pets on board. Do they do that? How does it work? That kind of thing. And I've got a funny story as well about one of the people I worked for who used to do just that. But the first topic is about security systems. Now, this is actually from a comment from the previous podcast. I think it was. I didn't write down the person's name, so if you're listening or watching, then thanks for the question. But he asked, are there security systems on any of the yachts that have missile defense / laser systems to prevent attacks on the yachts? Now, you see this in the press quite a lot, especially with Abramovich and some other high-profile yacht owners. And they say that they've got bulletproof glass and they've got anti-missile defense systems and escape modules and all this kind of stuff. And it sounds very James Bond-esque, doesn't it? Well, now, obviously, I haven't worked on every yacht, but what I can tell you is the legalities of some of the systems that are claimed to be on these yachts would basically mean that those yachts don't have what they say. Any missile defense system, the majority of missile defense systems use pyrotechnics to, they deploy a pyrotechnic to divert a missile. So a missile, like with aircraft, and I was in the military, so I know something about this. They fire missiles being fired at an aircraft, and they deploy chaff and flares, right, to try to confuse that missile because it's using heat usually to lock on. So they use all of these countermeasures, and they are pyrotechnics in themselves. They're explosives, and you wouldn't be allowed to have those on a vessel. And no country would allow that vessel in. So think about it. Let's just say you built your yacht in Russia, for the sake of argument, and Russia allows a yacht to have, these countermeasures, these pyrotechnic countermeasures. Let's say it's allowed in their law. Now, okay, when you're in Russia, you can sail around with your missile defense system and you're good to go. Now, if you try to bring that vessel out of Russia and you head through the Malacca Straits and across the Indian Ocean and through Suez Canal, well, you won't get that far because those countries won't let you in, right? Because you have to declare that you've got these on board. You can't just hide them because everyone's going to get arrested at some point when you try to smuggle those explosives and pyrotechnics into a country. So any story that you see about a yacht having that kind of missile defense system is not true. Now, there are some people. I actually mentioned that before on a video, and people said, well, there are systems that use lasers and stuff like that. Any system that has anything that is not pyrotechnics, then that's a possibility, I suppose. But yeah, they certainly don't have these ones. And, there's no phalanx systems on yachts, and torpedo tubes and all that there's none of that stuff, because you would never, ever be able to get that in. Now, the most likely scenario is if any of these vessels have got any firearms on board, they'll probably have a locker with some shotguns, because most countries allow some firearms for certain things, right? And the shotgun is probably the one that is most likely to be allowed. In some countries, you wouldn't be allowed in with them. They wouldn't let you in. Some countries might come on board, inspect them, lock the cabinet, seal the cabinet, not lock it, but put a seal on it to make sure that you don't take them out. And then when you leave, they have to come back on board and check it and stuff like that. In the UK, you're not allowed to own firearms or use them or import them and stuff like that. Unless you're for a government. Like if you were the bodyguards of the US president, for instance, obviously they're not going to take their guns away. But yeah, for a civilian, let's say I had a super yacht, I wouldn't be allowed to bring those in. So, the most likely scenario is you might have some firearms locker in a locked room somewhere with some small firearms in them. But yeah, the missile defense systems, not true. Now, in actual fact, some of the vessels that I've seen in the press that say that they have these systems, well, some of those vessels I've worked on. So I know for a fact that they don't have those systems, and they never had those systems, right? Obviously, I can't say which ones, but I don't want to say which ones because you can imagine what would happen with lawyers and stuff. But yeah, I've worked on some of the vessels that I've seen in the press saying that they've got these things, and they don't. So now, some of the things that they do have, one of the things that's in those articles is they say they've got bulletproof glass. Well, ships have very, very thick glass, and it's because they need to be like that, because they're getting battered by waves when you cross the Atlantic and stuff. So the glass they have is probably similar to ballistic glass, very, very toughened glass, very thick. When you tap on it, it almost feels like metal because it's so thick. So that probably would stop a round or two from a weapon. So you could technically say, anyone who knows about firearms knows that there's no such thing as bulletproof, right? You have ballistic glass or ballistic vest, flak jackets. We call them in the military. We didn't call them bulletproof vests. We call them flak jackets, right? So they're designed to stop things from, designed to potentially stop something. But if you took a round from an M16 or something like that, or a L85, I don't know there's a new weapon. The British just got a new weapon. Anyway, if you took a round directly to one of those jackets, it might go straight through. So there's no such thing as bulletproof. But yeah, the glass may be able to withstand some of that, but that's not what it's there for. It's there for seaworthiness and stuff like that. Now, something that they can have, and some of the cruise ships I used to work on, they have this, is that they have these ultrasonic devices where they can point. It looks like a spotlight, but when they point it at you, it sends this ultrasonic noise, very high-pitched noise. It's quite, the closer you get to it, the more unbearable it gets. So it's possible they might have those on board, but again, some of the yachts, they say, that have these systems I've been on, and they don't have those systems. So, but it's possible that some do, and they might have got them since I've been there, so that's legal. You're legally allowed to have those. Now, one yacht that I can talk about that because I've seen it on a video on YouTube is Roman Abramovich's Eclipse. They have anti-drone system. Now, if you go back to I think it was the 2017, this is when I was on my own, and 2017 Monaco Yacht Show, I did an interview. I think it was 2017, might have been 2018. I did an interview with a guy who was selling anti-drone technology to the yachting industry. If I find it, I'll post a link in the YouTube video so you can go and see it. Abramovich's yacht had this, and there was a video on YouTube a few years ago I watched, and the guy was flying his drone around the yacht from quite a distance, and all of a sudden his drone stopped responding, and then he said the crew of the yacht launched a boat, and they were using a device to prevent him from being able to control his drone. And then they forced the device to land near the boat, and they were actually manhandling his drone onto the boat. It was only a small drone, but they grabbed it and they were dealing with it. And then it managed to like slip out, and he got control of it again, and then he sped off. And he managed to retrieve his drone. But he was filming the yacht from a great distance, and they just basically tried to steal his drone out of the air. So I know that they were using some sort of anti-drone technology to do that. And I have heard other stories about them having that on board. Now, I filmed eclipse with a drone, but it was in a shipyard. So they probably, the owner wasn't on board and stuff like that. So it's probably when he was on board that they were doing it. So that's something that they might have. The other stuff, there's no super yacht sailing around. Like I see comments quite often in the comments section on the main channel saying, oh, but this yacht's got all of this equipment on board for terrorism and all this kind of stuff. Well, no, it doesn't, because every time your yacht travels into another country, especially in the EU, nobody wants to allow an armed vessel into their country, right? So you don't just sail in. You have to go through these checks, and just like when you land on a plane into another country, you have to go through immigration and customs and all that, and declarations and all that kind of stuff. And if you don't declare them, obviously there's some vessels probably sailing around illegally with vessels on board. We've covered stories about that in the past. A captain of a yacht in Mexico was arrested and kept in prison for so long because they had guns on board and he didn't declare them. So yeah, legally and officially, there's no yacht sailing around with missiles and stuff like that. So yeah, that's just something that's made up by the press, because they know that nobody's going to acknowledge or deny it. It's like the CIA, isn't it? What they always say is someone worked for the CIA. We say we can neither confirm nor deny. So they know that nobody's ever going to correct them on that story. So they just go with it. It's just a fun story. Okay, so we'll move on from that. I think I've covered pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about in that topic. We'll move on to another topic, which is about the hidden ownership of yachts. This is something that has come up a lot since the invasion of Ukraine, obviously, because all of these yachts were, scattered when that happened. We were covering it on the channel, and after we became a source for a lot of people to check who was sanctioned and who wasn't sanctioned, because I had a lot of people come up to me in the Monaco Yacht Show. Was it the 2022 Monaco Yacht Show? I think it was. Yeah, it was. And there were a lot of people saying, oh, we work in the industry and we were watching your channel when that all kicked off, because you were the only one who was telling us who was sanctioned and who wasn't, because they weren't allowed to do business with anyone who got sanctioned. Then all of the companies, the support companies, were not allowed to do business with them if they were based in Europe, or, if they were based in a Western country. So they were all watching for that reason. And it proved very, very difficult, even for the authorities, to be able to prove who the owner of a yacht is, right? So when that happened and all of these yachts scattered, the authorities in different countries, in Italy, in the UK, in France, they were all blocking these vessels some of them were in shipyards. You had Trieste in Italy, and Marina de Carrara, and Tarragona in Spain, La Ciotat in France. You had vessels in all of these places, and the UK. Now, one of the things that all of the governments were scrambling to do before those vessels left was to figure out who the owner was. And I mean, it should be a straightforward process, right? And there are, databases. I've had in the past, when I've done stories, I've had other companies that cover, media companies that cover the superyacht industry contact me and say, oh, we know that the owner is of that boat and what you said is incorrect. Well, they know who the owner officially is, right? You go to the IMO database, you can see who the official owner of any vessel is, right? Now, it will never say Bob Smith of 17 Roman Road, Leicestershire, England. It never says that on a super yacht. It's always a company, right? So the company owns the vessel. Now, usually that company is in the British Virgin Islands, you know, and then the company is owned by a trust, which is a blind trust, or the trust is private. Nobody's allowed to see who the owner of that trust is. This is something that, you know, some countries that have these kinds of trusts, they allow people to set them up in the top secret, and they don't have to say who's on the trust. So very difficult even for authorities, especially like if you have a boat that's arrested in France, for instance, and the boat's registered to a company in the British Virgin Islands, but the flag is registered to Cayman Islands or Malta or something like that, and then the trust is in another country again. So you've got all this cross-country stuff going on, and it's really difficult because, you know, first of all, they're in France, so they've got to go to another country, ask them information. Then, you know, there's 3 different nationalities involved in this one vessel, so it's very, very difficult for anybody to find out who the owner is. And very often, when they do get down to the bottom of who is on that trust, the person they believe it belongs to is not on the list, right? Because you know, sometimes it's related to a family member of a person. I'll give you an example. Motor Yacht Dilbar is registered to the sister of Alisher Usmanov. But he appears to be, let's say, allegedly, very clearly, seems to be the owner, right? Everybody who's worked on board that we've spoken to in the past, you know, like whether they probably don't work there anymore because they all got fired when the boat was arrested. But people we've spoken to, I've worked with people who used to work on Dilbar. They all say, yes, he's the owner. But on paper, the sister's the owner. And that is something that happens quite often. But sometimes the owner can be even a friend of that person. So they're not even related by family, right? So it's very, very tricky. And this is why the phrase ultimate beneficial owner, that's where that's come from. Because they're asking who is the UBO, because they know that on paper it's not going to have that person's name, right? But you know, the reality of who owns the boat is very different to what it says on paper. So that's a very tricky situation for the authorities to be able to figure out who owns it. And that's the reason why it's done, right? It's done for that. I mean, they're not always done that way. I mean, some of the yachts that are out there, it's very clear who owns the vessel. Not every yacht is done that way, but every yacht, I don't think I've ever come across. I mean, we're looking up on the IMO database. We look up yachts all the time, and I've never seen any yacht registered to a person. They've always been registered to a company. So that's standard operating procedure. Now, that is done for various reasons that they're not always shady. There's legitimate reasons, I'm told, for doing that. Usually to do with tax and the avoidance of paying tax. So that's one reason to do it. But that's not illegal. You know, to have a company set up in the British Virgin Islands. I can set up a company in the British Virgin Islands, and as a result of that, that my tax burden will be very different from if I was to set that same company up in my home country. So there are legitimate reasons for doing it, but very often, as the case has been, some of the yachts have recently, you know, it's become more obvious to people that these yachts are owned by people, but not on paper. And I've worked on some yachts that are in that situation. You know, I know clearly who the owner is, and yet we will get emails from this other person saying, "Hi, my name is ... and I'm the owner," and blah blah blah, and his request has come in as the owner of the yacht, but he's not the owner. I mean, he is on paper he's the owner, but we've never seen him. You know, he's never been on board, or when he's come on board, he's come on as an employee of the actual owner. So yeah, so it's clear. It's obviously that's the reason why they can do it. And then when we talk on the channel, on the news channel, we say, you know, this boat is owned by this person. This is why you see a lot of news companies will say this vessel is linked to, you know, because they can't say he owns it, because what happens then is you get an email from a lawyer saying, I represent the owner, the actual owner of the vessel, which is this company that no one's ever heard of in the British Virgin Islands, and you said that the owner of the vessel is this person. Well, we're writing to you to tell you that he's not the owner, and we represent the owner. But they don't actually say who the owner is, or they'll say that the owner is, this random company name in the Virgin Islands or in Cayman Islands or whatever it is, and that's the actual owner. But like I said, obviously we know if we go on a deep dive of that company, usually we can find it's linked to the actual owner. There's a story that we did recently where there was a German independent writer, and it turns out he was getting money from Alexei Mordashov for he was writing a book about Vladimir Putin. He'd done a few books, and it turns out that Alexei Mordashov was paying this writer, paid him 600,000 euros. It was in there. It was all over the news, and but the company that was paying the money was not in Mordashov's name, but it was linked to the company was linked to a person who worked for Alexei Mordashov. And the articles also said that the money was being paid by Alexei Mordashov, but like I said, when you looked on paper, it was somebody else who just happened to work for Alexei Mordashov. So another example of it. But yeah, we get emails all the time from not all the time, but we get them quite often from these lawyers saying that he's not the owner and this person is the owner, and you need to stop saying it and stuff like that. But at the same time, we've got evidence that the owner is this other person. And we've spoken to the former crew and former people who supplied stuff to the yacht, or people who built the yacht. And they're saying, oh, yeah, this person, yeah. So, you get enough people telling you the name of the person, then there's probably some truth in that, right? Oh, another thing about the trust, this trust that they set up is that they have, a couple of names on there. And so it'll be like themselves maybe, and then their wife, and then the daughter or the son or whatever, and then they can just remove names, and then all of a sudden that person has been removed, and then the trust is now, the person who was number 2 is now number 1 on the trust. And there was a story about Andrei Melnichenko just before he got sanctioned. His 2 of his companies, one of them was Eurochem, I don't remember the second name, and he owned them in a similar fashion through this trust, and his wife was the second person on the trust name, and a few days before he was sanctioned, he removed his name from the trust, which left his wife in charge of those companies. So for a little bit more of an extended period, they couldn't touch those companies, they couldn't block those companies. And then eventually they just added his wife to the sanctions lists because it was clear what had happened, right? He'd removed his name to put his wife in. So it was just a way to evade those sanctions. And then they added his wife to the list as well. And then those companies were blocked. So it's a very simple way of changing the controlling member of a company or of an asset. The yacht is an asset. So yeah, it's a murky thing, and there are lawyers that specifically go into business to set up these companies, and this is what they specialize in is hiding these hiding the ownership of these vessels. So it makes it very difficult even for the authorities to be able to clamp down on one of them. Now, I mean, this is just my opinion now, but I think that if I'm driving along in my car and I get stopped by the police and they say, "Is this your car?" and I don't answer that question, they're going to take my car, right? They're going to, especially in the UK. If I don't identify, I mean, they already know whose car it is because they do a check before they stop you, right? But if for some reason there was some murkiness behind the ownership, they didn't know, and they asked me, and I said, "Well, I can't tell you," they're putting that car on the back of a truck and taking it away, and they'll say, "Well, as soon as you come with the paperwork to show who owns it, then we'll let you have it back." And I think it kind of should be the same. I don't think any captain should be allowed to say, "I'm not, I've got an NDA and therefore I can't tell you." It's one thing that we always get told, if anyone asks you, when you work on a yacht, if anyone asks you outside who the owner is, you tell them you can't tell them. You can't talk to them, right? Which is fine. You know, I used to make stuff up, actually. I used to say, well, I remember I was in New Zealand once and I was on this big yacht and everyone was asking me who owned it. And I kept telling them it was Tony Blair. So the former UK Prime Minister. Because I thought I'll have a bit of fun with it. I'm not allowed to actually say, and they wouldn't even know who he was anyway. So I'll have a bit of fun with it. If you want to, if you want to say to us, you can't tell anybody who owns the vessel. But when it's the police who's asking, or the authorities, or you know, people like that, then you can't very well say, I'm not allowed to tell you who the owner is. You know, you're in their country. Like if your vessel's registered in the Cayman Islands or Malta or whatever, and you're in, you know, France or Italy or Spain or something, and they ask you who owns the boat, you're obliged to tell the authorities, right? Otherwise, they're going to take it from you, which has happened in a number of the cases. So, yeah, there's a big difference between not telling a tourist with a camera whose boat is this, and the police who's asking. So, I think that's definitely the right way to go in terms of blocking the exit of a vessel until they can determine who the owner is. All right, so we'll move on to our next topic, which is about pets on board. This is something that comes up quite a lot, actually. There's a lot of pet lovers who also like super yachts. Are any of the owners pet lovers? Do they have pets on board? I've worked for a few who have pets. I was in Italy end of last year. I can't believe I'm saying last year, 2023, and there was a boat there in San Remo. And I was trying to film, and there was 2 dogs on the stern on the transom, and one of them was just barking, bark. I wanted to throw something at it, just because I was trying to film, right? And all I could hear was this dog barking continuously for half an hour. And they had these 2 dogs, and the dog was actually barking at the fish. So the dog, I've got some video footage of it. The dog's looking in the water. It's like a husky type dog, looking in the water, freaking out at the fish, barking away at the fish. I'm surprised it didn't jump in. So yeah, people do have dogs. It's kind of a bit of a pain for the crew, I must admit. I love dogs, you know. I love certain dogs. I'm a big fan of dogs. My sister has dogs, and yeah, I'd love to have a dog, but I travel so much, I can't really. If I wasn't traveling so much, I'd definitely have a dog. But yeah, for the crew on board a yacht, I'll give you an example of how many people are involved in an animal on board a yacht. Now, obviously, I can't speak for all yachts. I'm just going on my own experience. But okay, so the dog is fed by the butler of the owner, right? So the best way to do it is if I tell you about a yacht I worked on. So the yacht had 2 butlers, right? So they worked, I think they did a day on, a day off. So there was always one of them on duty. So there's 2 butlers they've got to look after the dog. The dog's being fed. The chef is making the food for the dog. So the dog is getting fed very well. Even when they traveled and they were staying in a hotel, when the people of this kind of wealth stay in a hotel and they take the chef with them, they give them a facility in the kitchens there to be able to cook for the owners, right? Because they're still cooking even though they stay in a hotel. Not all hotels, but some. And one of the chefs was cooking this thing, and and the guy said to him, "What's that?" And another chef, he said, "What's that?" He said, "It's for the dog." So cooking for the dog. So we've got 2 butlers, the chef. You've got the deckhands who have to take the dog out. The dog wants to go for a walk, right? They don't want the dog doing its business on the teak decks, right? So the deckhands are out there doing that as well. You've also got the cleaners, you know, the people who clean, the stewardesses, interior staff. If the dog does do a number 2 on the carpet, now they've got to try and get that stain out, and invariably they've got white carpets everywhere as well, right? And I was on this same vessel. We had to replace a piece of carpet because the dog did its business on that carpet, and we had to replace it. We couldn't get the stain out, and there was like a giant bed. Giant bed. You could get like 15 people on this thing. It wasn't a bed, it was like a couch, but it looked like it was massive, right? And they had to, and it also had all of these electronics in it. There was all wiring going through the legs of this thing, because there was a table at the top of it, and it had chargers on it and lights. It was all, one of the things about yachts is they never want to have any cables anywhere. You'll never see any cables running along the floor on a yacht unless they put something in temporarily. But so everything's running through the legs of furniture and stuff like that. And this carpet was the carpet was underneath this table, right? So we had to table / couch bed thing. So we had to we had to remove this whole unit to be able to get access to the carpet, so the carpet could be replaced. And the carpet was 21,000 euros for this piece of carpet to remove. This is all because the dog shit on the rug. So and we had to dismantle this thing, take all the wiring out to remove it. New carpet. We had contractors came on with the new carpet. They fitted the carpet, and then we had to put the table back down and put all the electronics back in and all that stuff because of the dog. So you got a lot of people looking after this dog. The poor butlers who are at the beck and call of the owners, for 24-hour period, and until they hand over to the other guy. Even when the owners would go out in the evening, they had to look after the dog. So they didn't even have the night off because they've got to now look after the dog because they didn't take the dog with them. So yeah, there's a lot of people involved in when someone's got a dog. This dog was tiny as well. It wasn't even a real dog, what I would call a real dog. It wasn't like a greyhound or a German shepherd or one of those, a working dog. It was a leisure dog, let's say. It was a dog that you can put in your handbag. And so they loved this thing. And in actual fact, I talked about this once before, maybe 4 or 5 years ago on the channel. This dog got sick. And we were in New Zealand, and the owner, the wife, and a couple of his people they went on a trip I think they went for 3 days somewhere. They left the boat we were in Auckland, and they went to some resort somewhere, don't remember where. And the dog got sick while they were there, and the owner phones up the purser and says, I need to get a vet down here. And it was I don't know how, it was a bit tricky to get to this place. And so the purser's got 2 phones. She's got the vet on one phone, the owner on the other. And she's like, and I'm stood right there listening. And she's saying, okay. And she says to the owner, he said he'll come, but he need $500 to come right now, or something like that. And then she's like, oh, okay. And then the owner says, tell him if he comes right now, I'll give him $5,000. So now she's telling the guy, and then the guy goes, and then they come back to the boat a few days later, and the dog's still sick. So the owner brings in a vet from, let's say, Eastern Europe, and the vet, obviously the expert, he brings him in to look after the dog, and he stays on board. He stays in one of the staff cabins, and he's on board for months. I don't remember exactly how long. I did say it in the previous video. I've kind of partially forgotten the story. I should have watched my whole video, I suppose. Anyway, he's on board for a long time. I remember because he was always sat in the crew. We had on this boat, it was a big boat, so we had a crew lounge. We had a crew mess and a crew lounge. Most boats only have a crew mess, but we had a lounge in there. Really, really nice. And we had the same system the owner had in the lounge, so you could watch movies, like a Crestron system with Kaleidoscope, it was called. And he was always sat in there watching movies because he had nothing to do. He was doing, like, every day he would go and do a report with the owner, tell him how the dog was getting on, and then he would obviously do something with the dog, but it probably took him 20 minutes, right? And at the end of the when he was eventually finished, and the dog was well enough that they didn't need the vet anymore, the guy went home. Never thought anything of it. And then someone says to me, do you know how much that guy was getting every day, the vet? You know how much his daily rate was 1,500 euros. So I worked it out, and he paid him over 300,000 euros to have this vet on board. So that guy probably went home and bought a house, well, paid off his mortgage or something, And it was probably the average salary in the country where he came from was probably about $500 a month. I think. I don't know. I'm just guessing, but that was probably a life changing. I mean, it'd be life changing for most of us, right? To get 300,000 euros. and he got it. He was on board for a few months. I don't remember exactly how long it was, but you can work it out anyway. It was around 300. It was over 300,000 euros. So divide that by 1,500, and there you go. But yeah, so this was all for this little dog, and the dog. I must admit, I didn't like this dog. Whenever I went into the main salon where the owner was, if the owner was there, the dog would attack you and try to bite you. And if the owner wasn't, if there was nobody there and you went in on your own, the dog would be cowering in the corner. But when you went in and they were there, the dog would run after you, would try and bite you, and the owner thought it was funny, so he would just laugh. This dog attacking one of the crew. Unfortunately, it was a tiny little dog, so it didn't ever do any harm. But yeah, it was crazy. The other thing that we had to do is the crew built these boxes, and they put soil in it, and they actually grew grass in these boxes, and then they would cut the grass and they would look after so they had basically a lawn for the dog, so the dog could have a sniff and do his business. This is where the dog was officially supposed to do the business. On this, they had 2 of these boxes. They were quite big as well. They were quite heavy, and this is where the dog was meant to go. So all of that work that the crew had done to build the box, fill it full of soil, put the grass, plant the grass, grow the grass, cut the grass. This is all for this dog. So yeah, it's a real pain when the owner has a pet on board for us. It's a bit like when they have kids. It's not the same, but yeah, it's fortunately for me, I only worked on one boat. I think that had a pet, and very few that had children or young children. I worked on for a few owners who've had grown-up children, which wasn't such a problem, but younger children can be a big problem. So yeah, so these dogs, that dog lived a lifestyle that some people would probably like, getting the best foods, getting the best medical care. Yeah, quite something. But yeah, they do have it, and they really love this dog. Obviously, they spent an awful lot of money keeping that dog alive. All right, I think I've gone on long enough. I've worked up a thirst, so I'm going to have to go and get a drink. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have any questions or any topic ideas for future podcasts, please put them in the comments section on the YouTube channel. We'll make a list, and we'll add those. Any good questions we'll add to our list, and we'll cover them hopefully in a future topic. We're going to have interviews as well. We're going to be interviewing some people in the near future, hopefully, if we can organize that. All right, guys. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks very much for listening. If you're still here, you get 10 points. Yeah, and let us know what you think of the video in the comments section on YouTube, like I said. And yeah, we'll catch up with you soon. All right, guys. Thanks. Bye-bye.